What did Edinburgh really look like before the new town, before wide streets, open spaces, and planned expansion? And what did it feel like to live in a city shaped by defense, crowding, and centuries of pressure? In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, maps, and engravings to life. The goal isn't just to look at the past, but to step into it, to move through these scenes and see the city as it once was. We're going to move around, change camera angles, and shift perspective. And if you stay until the end, I'll show how these same places look today, revealing how Edinburgh transformed over time. I want to start a bit earlier, right at this drawing. The drawing takes us back to around the mid-1400s, long before the Edinburgh we usually picture. It's not an exact reconstruction, but it shows the city in roughly the way it existed then. At this point, the town is really just stretched along a narrow ridge of land. The castle sits right at the top, planted into the rock, and everything else runs downhill from there. There isn't much room to spread out. Steep ground on both sides keeps the settlement pinned in place, and that simple fact ends up shaping how the city grows for centuries. This view looks at Edinburgh from the south in the mid-1600s. The city itself is still tightly packed along the ridge. The old town clings to the high ground, dense and dark, with most life compressed into a narrow strip of land. Around it, everything opens up. Once you're past the buildings, it's mostly fields, slopes, and open ground, with very little built beyond the city's edge. Edinburgh hasn't spread outward yet, it's building upward instead. And by the 1700s, that pressure will shape daily life in ways that are hard to miss. When you look out over Edinburgh like this, your eye always ends up here. It's worth slowing down and focusing on the castle, because for centuries it's been the center of power in the city. For much of its history, Edinburgh Castle is defined by its position. It sits high above the city, built directly into the rock, more a continuation of the landscape than something placed on top of it. From the outside, it's meant to be seen from a distance, solid, elevated, and difficult to approach. Over time, the castle remains dominant, but the world around it starts to change. The city grows closer, movement gathers at its base, and the fortress becomes a constant presence in everyday life, not just a military one. Edinburgh Castle took shape as a royal fortress in the 11th century, likely under Malcolm III, then King of Scots, built to command the rock and defend the growing settlement below. Whoever controlled this rock controlled the city below it. For centuries, Edinburgh Castle sat at the center of Scotland's political and military struggles. By the time we reached the 1700s, the castle was already hundreds of years old. It had been besieged, damaged, rebuilt, and fought over repeatedly, changing hands more often than almost any other place in Scotland. For most of the people who lived here, the castle meant routine, guard duty, maintenance, and a lot of waiting. Important history happened here, of course, but most days were probably just very long and very dull. And when you finally move inside the walls, the perspective shifts. The height and scale fall away, replaced by enclosed spaces where the castle isn't just a symbol, but a place where people lived, worked, and exercised power from within. If the Union flag looks a little off to you, you're not imagining it. This is what it looked like before Ireland was represented, back when the Union only reflected England and Scotland. That's it for Edinburgh Castle for now, but stay to the end of the video and I'll show you how it looks today. For now, though, I want to move away from the rock and follow the city downhill toward another building that shaped Edinburgh just as deeply in a very different way. This is the other end of Edinburgh's spine, the Palace of Holyrood House. The site begins as a royal abbey in the 12th century, founded under King David I, and over time it grows into Scotland's main royal residence in the city. By the 1500s, this is where kings and queens stay when they're in Edinburgh. By the 1700s, it's still the official royal residence in Scotland, though it's used far less than it once was after the Union of the Crowns and Parliament in 1707 shifted real power south to London. This gateway would once have stood here as part of the Palace of Holyrood, originally built in the early 1500s as the formal entrance into the royal precincts. The original gatehouse was actually demolished in 1753, and only fragments of it survive, woven into the buildings around the Abbey Courthouse today. It's strange to think how many people once passed through this exact point, when today it's easy to walk by without realizing what stood here at all. And standing here now, it's clear this end of the city was never meant to feel sealed off. Compared to the castle, everything here feels flatter, more open, and far less defensive. This wasn't a last line of defense, it was a place for court life, ceremony, and governing, set right at the edge of the city and the countryside beyond. Holyrood Abbey was originally built as an Augustinian monastery and religious center, tied closely to the royal court. For centuries, it served as a place of worship, burial, and ceremony, sitting right beside what would later become the palace. By the late 1700s, Holyrood Abbey was no longer a functioning church. After the Reformation, it fell into disuse, and by the 18th century, it stood open to the sky, slowly breaking apart beside the palace. This is where royal life actually played out. Councils met, alliances were negotiated, and daily routines carried on, just a short walk from the streets of the old town. You can feel the difference immediately, less fortress, more residence. If you want to see what's left of this place today, stick around until the end, and I'll show you some present-day views. For the moment, though, let's move on and continue through Edinburgh as it was in the 1700s. This is a late 17th century north-facing view of Edinburgh, showing the city stretched along its ridge, with the castle anchoring the skyline above it. From this angle, you really see how tightly packed the old town was, and how abruptly the city drops away on either side. See how the city almost meets the water at the foot of the castle. That relationship is unusual, and it turns out to be one of the most important details in this view. This view looks across the Nor Loch, the body of water just below Edinburgh Castle, towards St. Cuthbert's Church, which sat just beyond the city's edge, surrounded by open ground. The loch itself wasn't natural. It was deliberately created in the 15th century by damming the valley, turning the north side of Edinburgh into a defensive barrier beneath the castle. Over time, it took on another role entirely. It became the city's dumping ground, a place for waste, sewage, and on occasion a public stage for executions and grim displays meant to be seen from above. By the 1700s, the Nor Loch was less a body of water and more a problem the city would eventually have to deal with. And deal with it they did, beginning in the 1760s. The Nor Loch was gradually drained and filled in to make room for one of the most ambitious projects the city had attempted, the North Bridge stretching across the former valley to link the old town with new ground beyond it. In the background here, you can see the bridge taking shape, a sign that Edinburgh was no longer turning inward for defense, but outward for growth. What had once been a grim barrier beneath the castle became the foundation for expansion, opening the way to what would soon become the new town. Coming back to this earlier view, it's striking how central the Nor Loch once was to Edinburgh's shape and identity. What began as a defensive barrier beneath the castle later became a problem to solve and eventually a space to reclaim. It's a reminder that Edinburgh didn't just grow over time, it kept reinventing itself. This is St. Giles Cathedral in the late 1700s, a building that had already watched Edinburgh change again and again. By this point, it was far more than a church. It was a place where sermons could spark unrest, where political ideas were shaped, and where the city gathered in moments of tension as much as in moments of faith. What's striking is how closely everyday life pressed up against it. Homes and shops sit right against the walls, people moving in and out as part of their daily routines. Notice the statue standing in front of St. Giles. It depicts King Charles II, restored to the throne after years of civil war, and placed in this space as a clear signal that royal authority had returned to Scotland. By the time of this view, in the late 1700s, the statue had already been standing for well over a century.
Even in a city shaped by religion and reform, the presence of the crown was meant to be seen right at the heart of public life. Stick around until the end of the video and I'll show you what this place looks today. For now, though, let's continue through the old town and stop at another of its landmarks, right on the spine of Edinburgh, the Royal Mile, then more commonly known as the High Street, the main artery of the old town that runs downhill from Edinburgh Castle to Holyrood Palace, linking the city's two great seats of power. Standing the Tron Kirk. The tower is familiar, but the details aren't quite the same as today. Over the centuries, it's been repaired, altered, and simplified, which is why it feels both recognizable and slightly off compared to today. Built in the 16th century, the Tron Kirk wasn't just a church, it was a marker of civic life, standing at one of the busiest crossroads in the city. This stretch of street was always loud and crowded, traders calling out, carts rattling